May 21, 1943. Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base, New Mexico. Captain William Randall's boots crunched across scorched earth, still radiating heat from the previous night's inferno. Ash swirled in the desert wind. The smell of burned wood and melted tar hung thick in the morning air. Before him stood the charred skeleton of what had been, just 16 hours earlier, a pristine aircraft hangar. The control tower was gutted. 3 barracks buildings reduced to blackened timber frames. A general staff car sat in the motor pool, its paint blistered off, tires melted into the concrete. Randall stopped at the hangar's remains. His engineering team had briefed him on what happened, but standing here, surveying the devastation, the reality seemed impossible. We did this to ourselves. With bats. The fire had started simultaneously in 7 locations across the base, not from enemy sabotage, not from an electrical fault or careless smoking. Armed Mexican free-tailed bats, each carrying a 17-gram napalm incendiary device designed by Harvard chemist Louis Fieser, had escaped their refrigerated containers during a photo opportunity for training films. When the New Mexico sun warmed them from hibernation, they flew to every dark crevice they could find, inside the hangar, into the barracks attics, under the eaves of the control tower. Then, precisely on schedule, their time delay fuses had activated. The base commander's after-action report would state the fire damage conservatively at $50,000, over $800,000 in modern currency. An entire auxiliary airfield, built specifically for this top-secret weapons program, had been incinerated by the very weapon it was designed to test. But Randall understood what his superiors in Washington would understand. This catastrophic accident had just proven that Project X-ray worked exactly as designed. If 6 escaped bats could destroy an American military base, what could 1 million bats do to the paper and wood cities of Japan? The mathematics were simple and terrifying, and the journey to this moment, this spectacular self-immolation, had begun with a dentist's vacation, a presidential memo, and a plan so audacious it redefined what Americans thought possible in total war. The journey to this revelation had begun 17 months earlier, on January 12, 1942. Dr. Lytle "Slim" Adams sat at his desk in Irwin, Pennsylvania, finishing a letter to the White House. A 61-year-old dental surgeon and part-time inventor, Adams had spent the previous month obsessing over how to strike back at Japan. The attack on Pearl Harbor had shocked the nation. America needed weapons, needed them desperately, and needed ideas that matched the audacity of Japanese aggression. Adams had just returned from Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. The sight of millions of Mexican free-tailed bats emerging from the caves at dusk had left him awestruck. These creatures could carry their own weight, sometimes more. They could fly 20 to 40 miles from a release point. They roosted in dark spaces, attics, eaves, the shadowed corners of buildings. And Japanese cities, Adams knew, were built almost entirely of wood, bamboo, and paper. "Dear Mr. President," Adams wrote, "I attach hereto a proposal designed to frighten, demoralize, and excite the prejudices of the people of the Japanese Empire." He outlined what he called a practical, inexpensive, and effective plan. Capture millions of bats, attach tiny incendiary bombs to each one, load them into special bomb casings, drop the casings from aircraft over Japanese cities at dawn. The bats would disperse across a 40-mile radius, hide in buildings, and when their time delay fuses activated, thousands of fires would ignite simultaneously across the target city. The letter reached First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who passed it to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The president's response came in an interagency memorandum dated February 1942. "This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but is worth looking into." By March 1942, the Army Air Forces and Chemical Warfare Service had greenlighted preliminary research. Adams assembled an extraordinary team. Dr. Jack von Blocher, a mammalologist from the Los Angeles County Museum, Lieutenant Tim Holt, a movie actor turned Air Force pilot, the Hurled brothers, Bobby and Eddie, ex-gangster Patricio Patsy Batista, who claimed to have worked for Al Capone, the Benish brothers, Frank and Mark, Ray Williams, a former lobster fisherman, and two high school students from von Blocher's laboratory, Jack Kufer and Harry Fletcher. Most enlisted in the Air Force for the project's duration, receiving immediate, acting, non-commissioned officer ranks. The team's first challenge, which bat? They tested several North American species before selecting the Mexican free-tailed bat, Tadarita brasilianus. These bats weighed approximately 15 grams, but could carry payloads of 18 grams, more than their body weight. They were abundant. 4 caves in Texas each housed several million individuals. They were hardy, capable of surviving temperature variations, and critically, they exhibited reliable roosting behavior, seeking dark, enclosed spaces at dusk, exactly when the bombs would be dropped. Adams received permission from the National Park Service to harvest bats from government-owned caves. His team drove through the Southwest in Adams's battered Buick, consulting with local bat experts. In Bandera, Texas, they found a guano expert who led them to caves containing the world's largest known colonies, millions upon millions of bats. The second challenge, the bomb. The incendiary device had to weigh less than 18 grams. It had to reliably ignite, it needed a time delay mechanism, and it had to generate enough heat to start fires in wood and paper structures. Entered Dr. Louis Fieser. A professor of organic chemistry at Harvard University, Fieser was already legendary in military research circles. In early 1942, working in a top-secret laboratory in the basement of Harvard's Converse Chemistry Laboratory, Fieser had invented napalm, a jellied petroleum mixture that burned hotter and longer than gasoline alone. On July 4, 1942, Fieser had tested his first napalm bomb on Harvard's soccer field near the business school. The test was devastatingly successful. For Project X-ray, Fieser designed 2 miniature napalm devices, a 17-gram model and a 28-gram model. The smaller device, which became standard, was encased in cellulose and measured about the size of a human finger to the second joint. It produced a 10-inch flame that burned for approximately 4 minutes. The fuse was elegantly simple. A small wire held back a firing pin. Copper chloride solution slowly corroded the wire. When the wire dissolved, the pin released, striking the igniter, and the napalm burned. The attachment method evolved through testing. Early attempts used surgical clips and string, the idea being that bats would bite through the string after landing. This proved unreliable. The final method, a surgical-grade adhesive applied directly to the bat's chest, securing the device firmly. By March 1943, Project X-ray had its complete weapons system designed. A 5-foot-long sheet metal canister contained 26 stacked trays, each tray holding 40 individual compartments. Each compartment housed 1 hibernating bat with its attached incendiary. Total capacity, 10,040 armed bats per canister. The deployment concept was straightforward. B-24 Liberator bombers would carry the canisters to 5,000 feet above the target city. At that altitude, the canister would be released. As the bats inside would warm from their refrigerated hibernation, at 1,000 feet, a parachute would deploy, slowing the canister's descent and triggering the release mechanism. The 26 trays would separate, opening their compartments. Over 1,000 awakened bats would fly free, dispersing across a 20 to 40-mile radius, instinctively seeking dark roosting spots before the sun rose fully. The plan for a full-scale attack on Osaka Bay called for 10 B-24 Liberator bombers, each carrying 100 canisters. Total deployment, 1,040,000 bat bombs in a single mission. Through the summer and fall of 1942, Adams's team refined their procedures. They developed specialized traps, 3-foot diameter nets on 10-foot poles that could capture 100 bats in 3 passes across a cave entrance. They experimented with refrigeration trucks to transport captured bats in hibernation. They discovered that at approximately 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the Mexican free-tailed bat would enter a dormant state, allowing technicians to handle them safely and to catch the incendiary devices. The attachment process required precision. Bats had to remain unconscious. Technicians placed them in ice cube trays and cooled them. While dormant, a small amount of adhesive was applied to the bat's chest, and the 17-gram napalm device was pressed firmly into place. Each bat was then loaded into its individual compartment in the canister tray. The entire process, from capture to loading, could be completed in less than 24 hours if necessary. Field tests at Muroc Lake, California began in late 1942. Over 6,000 bats participated in Army-sponsored assessments. Early results were mixed. Some bats, insufficiently warmed, failed to wake from hibernation and fell to earth with their dummy bombs still attached. Others woke but immediately flew away, disappearing into the California desert. Still others collided mid-air when released in large groups, creating chaos rather than dispersed coverage. The Army Air Force's Technical Training Command took control of testing in early 1943. They relocated operations to Carlsbad, where the nearby caverns provided unlimited supply of test subjects. Engineers redesigned the canister's opening mechanism. Biologists studied bat flight patterns, determining optimal release altitudes and times. Chemists adjusted the fuse timers, calculating exactly how long bats needed to find roosting spots before the napalm ignited. By May 1943, the program appeared ready for live-fire testing. The team had successfully deployed thousands of bats with dummy devices. The canisters opened reliably at the correct altitude. The bats dispersed as predicted, covering wide geographic areas and instinctively seeking enclosed spaces. The only remaining question: would the incendiary devices work as designed in real-world conditions? The answer came catastrophically on May 15, 1943, though not during the planned test. Photographers from the Army Signal Corps had arrived at Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base to film training footage. They wanted clear shots of armed bats for instructional purposes. The team prepared 6 bats, each carrying a live 17-gram napalm device with functional fuse. These would be photographed in controlled conditions, refrigerated, dormant, visually demonstrating the weapon system. But the New Mexico sun on May 15th was unforgiving. Temperatures climbed into the high 80s. As the bats sat in their display containers for the photo session, the heat penetrated the thin metal. The bats began to warm, and when Mexican free-tailed bats wake, they fly. 6 armed bats escaped. They dispersed across the base exactly as they would over a Japanese city. One flew into an aircraft hangar, wedging itself into the rafters. 2 found the attic of a barracks building. 1 squeezed into the control tower's ventilation system. Another roosted under the eaves of a second barracks. The 6th found the general's staff car, crawling into the gap between the hood and the engine compartment. The fuses were set for 4 hours, time enough for bats to find hiding spots in an enemy city. At approximately 11 p.m. on May 15, 1943, the napalm ignited. The hangar erupted first. The 10-inch flame from a single 17-gram device was enough to ignite stored materials, wooden structures, aviation fuel residue. Within minutes, the entire building was engulfed. The barracks fires started almost simultaneously, spreading through the wooden framing and roofing materials. The control tower fire burned from the inside out, consuming electrical systems and creating a spectacular light show visible for miles across the desert. The general's car simply melted. Fire crews fought through the night, but the damage was catastrophic. 7 separate fires, each started by a single bat carrying less than an ounce of napalm, had destroyed a military base. The Carlsbad disaster forced a brutal reassessment. On one hand, Project X-ray had just proven its fundamental concept with horrifying effectiveness. On the other hand, the military had conclusively demonstrated that weaponized bats were extraordinarily difficult to control. Captain Randall's engineering report, filed on May 22, 1943, was clinically precise. Subject weapons demonstrated capability to initiate multiple simultaneous fires across dispersed geographic area. Uncontrolled deployment resulted in destruction of target structures. Conclusion: weapon system functions as designed. Control mechanisms require improvement. The Army Air Forces drew a different conclusion. In June 1943, they began planning to transfer the project. The official reasoning cited resource allocation priorities and operational readiness timelines, but the underlying message was clear. Project X-ray was too unpredictable, too dangerous, and too slow to develop for the Army Air Force's strategic bombing campaign. In August 1943, the project transferred to the United States Navy. The Navy, with typical bureaucratic efficiency, immediately renamed it Project X-ray, despite the fact that it already had that name. Authority then passed to the Marine Corps in December 1943. The Marines approached the project with characteristic intensity. They relocated testing to the Marine Corps Air Station at El Centro, California. They refined the canister design. They experimented with different release altitudes. They adjusted fuse timings. And critically, they built a target. At the Chemical Warfare Service's Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, engineers constructed a mock-up Japanese village. The structures used authentic materials: bamboo framing, paper walls, tatami mats, wooden roof supports. Buildings were furnished with typical household items: futons, low tables, paper screens. The goal was absolute accuracy. If the bat bombs worked here, they would work in Osaka, Tokyo, or Kyoto. On December 13, 1943, the Marines conducted their first live-fire test at the mock village. Aircraft dropped canisters containing armed bats at dawn. The results exceeded expectations. 30 fires started across the village complex. 22 burned themselves out. The devices had ignited, but insufficient fuel was present to sustain the fires. But 8 fires continued burning. 4 of those fires grew large enough that, according to the after-action report, they would have required the services of professional firefighters if they had occurred in an actual urban setting. The chief chemist of incendiary testing at Dugway, witnessing the test, wrote, "A reasonable number of destructive fires can be started, in spite of the extremely small size of the units. The main advantage of the units would seem to be their placement within the enemy structures without the knowledge of the householder or fire watchers, thus allowing the fire to establish itself before being discovered." The National Defense Research Committee observer stated flatly, "It was concluded that X-ray is an effective weapon." Most significantly, the chief chemist's report provided comparative analysis. On a weight basis, X-ray was more effective than the standard incendiary bombs in use at the time. Expressed another way, the regular bombs would give probably 167 to 400 fires per bomb load, where X-ray would give 3,625 to 4,748 fires. By any technical measure, Project X-ray had succeeded. The weapon worked. It could start thousands of fires simultaneously. It could penetrate structures in ways conventional bombs could not. And it could do so with remarkable efficiency, more than 9 times as many fires per bomber load compared to standard incendiaries. But technical success was not the same as strategic viability. Project X-ray existed because of a specific strategic requirement: find a way to destroy Japanese industrial capacity without the massive bomber fleets required for conventional strategic bombing campaigns. In early 1942, when Adams first proposed his bat bomb concept, the United States faced a brutal reality. Japan's industrial cities were thousands of miles from any American bomber base. The B-17 Flying Fortress, America's premier bomber, had insufficient range to reach Tokyo from any Allied-controlled airfield. The B-24 Liberator had marginally better range, but still could not conduct sustained strategic bombing campaigns against Japanese home islands. American war planners knew that conventional strategic bombing of Japan would require capture of island bases within bomber range of Japanese cities, construction of massive airfields on those islands, deployment of hundreds of heavy bombers, thousands of trained aircrew, continuous supply lines for fuel, ordnance, and maintenance, months, possibly years to establish. The bat bomb offered an alternative. 10 B-24s flying a single mission from the Aleutian Islands, territory the U.S. already controlled, could deliver over 1 million incendiary devices to Osaka Bay. If even 10% of those devices successfully started fires, the result would be 100,000 simultaneous blazes across one of Japan's most critical industrial regions. Louis Fieser's calculations showed the mathematics clearly. A conventional M69 incendiary bomb weighed 6 pounds and contained approximately 100 pounds of napalm per cluster. A B-24 carrying conventional incendiaries could drop roughly 40 clusters, 4,000 pounds of napalm per mission. This might start 167 to 400 fires. The bat bomb system was radically different. Each 17-gram device contained only 0.6 ounces of napalm, but a B-24 carrying 100 canisters with 1,040 bats each would deliver 104,000 devices, still only about 3,500 pounds total napalm weight, less than conventional bombs. But the delivery method changed everything. Each device would be placed inside a structure, hidden from fire watchers, allowed to establish itself before detection. The chief chemist's estimate of 3,625 to 4,748 fires per bomber load was based on this placement advantage. The design philosophy was elegant. Leverage biology to achieve strategic effects that physics alone could not match. But this philosophy depended entirely on factors beyond engineering control. Bat behavior, weather conditions, seasonal variations. The breeding cycles of Mexican free-tailed bats meant spring deployments were impossible. Male bats refused to eat during mating season, weakening them for the mission. Summer was optimal, but summer meant longer daylight hours, giving Japanese fire watch systems more time to respond. And there was a larger problem, one that became increasingly apparent through 1943 and early 1944, the Manhattan Project. On the same day Adams sent his letter to the White House in January 1942, American physicists were already working on atomic bomb development. By mid-1943, when Project X-ray successfully burned down Carlsbad Army Airfield, Manhattan Project scientists had already produced the first controlled nuclear chain reaction. By December 1943, when Marines were testing bat bombs in Utah, Los Alamos was already designing implosion mechanisms. The mathematics of atomic weapons were incomparably more favorable. One aircraft, one bomb, one city destroyed. Not 100,000 small fires requiring specific conditions to spread, one guaranteed total conflagration. Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, reviewed Project X-ray's timeline in early 1944. The Marines estimated combat readiness by mid-1945 at the earliest. Testing would continue through summer 1944. Production of millions of bats and thousands of canisters would require months. Training air crews for the specialized deployment procedures would take additional time, and all of this assumed no further setbacks, no additional control problems, no unexpected biological complications. King's decision came in March 1944. canceled Project X-ray. By that time, the program had spent approximately $2 million, equivalent to over $34 million in modern currency. Over 6,000 bats had been used in testing, one auxiliary airfield had been destroyed, and the United States had developed a biological weapon that worked exactly as designed but would never see combat. The cancellation of Project X meant different things to different participants. For the bats, it meant survival. Had the program continued, estimates suggested capturing and deploying between 1 and 3 million Mexican free-tailed bats per month during summer offensive operations. The ecological impact on bat populations in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona would have been severe. For Dr. Adams, it meant a peculiar form of vindication. His perfectly wild idea had been proven correct. The weapon worked. Presidential approval, military funding, extensive testing, positive technical reports all confirmed that his vacation-inspired brainstorm was legitimate. But legitimate did not mean necessary. Adams maintained for the rest of his life that bat bombs would have been more effective and more humane than atomic bombs. He told a 1948 interview with the National Speleological Society, "Think of thousands of fires breaking out simultaneously over a circle of 40 miles in diameter for every bomb dropped. Japan could have been devastated, yet with small loss of life." For Louis Fieser, Project X was a footnote in a career that would be defined by napalm's far more extensive use. His 17-gram devices never burned Japanese cities, but his napalm formula did. B-29 super fortresses carried Fieser's invention in 1,000-pound clusters over Tokyo, Osaka, Yokohama, and dozens of other cities. The firebombing of Tokyo on the night of March 9–10, 1945, killed an estimated 100,000 civilians, more than either atomic bomb would kill, using conventional napalm incendiaries. When asked later about napalm's legacy, Fieser was unapologetic. "I have no right to judge the morality of napalm just because I happened to invent it," he told journalist John Lannon in 1967. "I couldn't foresee that this stuff was going to be used against babies and Buddhists." For the military establishment, Project X represented a broader lesson about biological weapons. The program demonstrated that living organisms could be weaponized effectively, but that control remained the insurmountable problem. You could train soldiers, maintain equipment, enforce discipline. You could not train millions of bats to fly only toward enemy structures. The same challenge would appear repeatedly in subsequent biological warfare research. Crop-destroying insects might attack friendly agriculture. Disease-spreading organisms might infect your own population. Weaponized animals operated according to biological imperatives, not military objectives. Project X also highlighted the resource allocation challenges of total war. The $2 million spent on bat bombs was insignificant compared to the Manhattan Project's eventual $2 billion cost. But that $2 million represented laboratory time, skilled scientists, military oversight, test facilities, all resources that might have been directed toward weapons that achieved deployment faster. The program's cancellation in March 1944 meant those resources could be redirected. Fieser continued napalm development, creating larger devices and more efficient delivery systems. The Chemical Warfare Service focused on conventional incendiaries. The B-29 Super Fortress program accelerated, providing the long-range bomber capability that made strategic bombing of Japan possible without bat-based delivery systems. One group paid perhaps the strangest price for Project X's existence: the thousands of bats that survived testing. Released back into their cave systems, these bats carried no physical scars. The adhesive used to attach incendiary devices was designed to dissolve naturally, but their population had been significantly reduced. Entire caves had been netted repeatedly. Breeding cycles had been disrupted. The Mexican free-tailed bat population in the American Southwest declined measurably between 1942 and 1945, though it recovered in subsequent decades. The mock Japanese village at Dugway Proving Ground remains standing after Project X cancellation. It was reused for testing conventional incendiary bombs, helping refine the tactics that would eventually be used in the actual firebombing campaigns of 1945. The structures that bat bombs had successfully ignited in December 1933 were burned again and again by conventional weapons, each test providing data for the strategic bombing campaign. Of all the participants, perhaps Jack Kaufer, the high school student turned Project X team member, best captured the program's moral complexity. Writing decades later, after a career making nature documentaries, Kaufer reflected, "At the time, in the perceived greater good of winning the war, I was ready for the sacrifice of 1,000,000 bats without a second thought. Times have changed, and so have I. It's hard to imagine now putting myself into a frame of mind to kill 1,000,000 anything, birds, bats, or bumblebees." But in 1942, in 1943, in the desperate years when victory was uncertain and defeat meant subjugation, the sacrifice of 1,000,000 bats for strategic advantage seemed entirely reasonable, as did the sacrifice of 1,000,000 men. As did the incineration of entire cities. Total war did not permit squeamishness about means, only ruthless evaluation of ends. The complete technical record of Project X-ray, compiled from Army, Air Forces, Navy, and Marine Corps reports, reveals the scope of the program. Bats captured, approximately 6,000 for testing. Millions more would have been required for combat operations. Species selected: Mexican free-tailed bat, Tadarida brasiliensis. Weight: 15 grams. Payload capacity: 18 grams, 120% of body weight. Range from release point: 20 to 40 miles. Preferred roosting: dark and closed spaces. Delivery system: canister, 5-foot sheet metal tube. Capacity: 26 trays times 40 bats equals 1,040 bats per canister. Release altitude: 5,000 feet. Parachute deployment: 1,000 feet. Carrier aircraft B-24 Liberator. Canisters per aircraft: 100. Total bat bombs per aircraft: 104,000. Test locations: Muroc Lake, California, Army Air Forces, fall 1942 to spring 1943. Carlsbad Army Airfield, New Mexico, May 1943. El Centro, California, Marine Corps, December 1943 to March 1944. Dugway Proving Ground, Utah, Chemical Warfare Service, December 1943 to early 1944. Test results: successful deployment rate, approximately 60%, 40% failed to wake or flew away. Fire starting success rate, approximately 30% of successfully deployed bats. Fires requiring firefighter intervention, 4 out of 30 started, 13%. Comparative effectiveness, 3,625 to 4,747 per bomb load versus 167 to 400 for conventional incendiaries. Major incidents: May 15, 1943. 6 armed bats escaped during photo session, burned Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base. Damage: 1 aircraft hangar, 3 barracks buildings, 1 control tower, 1 general's vehicle, estimated $50,000, $800,000 in modern currency. Project timeline: January 12, 1942, Adams proposes concept to White House. February 1942, President Roosevelt approves investigation. March 1942, Army Air Forces authorizes preliminary research. Summer 1942 to spring 1943, development and testing under Army Air Forces. August 1943, transfer to U.S. Navy. December 1943, transfer to U.S. Marine Corps. March 1944, cancellation ordered by Fleet Admiral Ernest J. King. Total cost, approximately $2 million, $34+ million in modern currency. Reason for cancellation: Manhattan Project development overtook Bat bomb timeline. Atomic bombs promised combat readiness by summer 1945, same timeline as Bat bombs, with immensely greater destructive capability and no biological control complications. The comparative analysis. Atomic bomb. Development timeline, 1942 to 1945, 3 years. Cost, $2 billion. Delivery system. Single aircraft, single bomb. Effect, complete city destruction, guaranteed. Control issues, none. The philosophical difference. American strategic bombing doctrine, evolved through European campaigns in 1943 to 1944, increasingly prioritized overwhelming force and technological superiority over tactical efficiency. The Bat bomb represented the opposite approach. Leverage biological systems to achieve effects disproportionate to delivered payload weight. Both approaches worked. The Bat bomb tests at Dugway proved conclusively that biological delivery systems could start more fires per bomber load than conventional incendiaries. But more fires per bomber load became irrelevant when the United States developed sufficient bomber production to deliver overwhelming loads of conventional weapons. By mid-1944, when Project X-ray was canceled, Boeing was producing B-29 Superfortresses at a rate of over 350 per month. Each B-29 could carry 20,000 pounds of bombs to Tokyo from bases in the Marianas Islands. The strategic calculation became simple. Why weaponize 1 million bats when you can build 1,000 bombers? The Bat bomb's cancellation reflected not its failure, but its obsolescence. In a war of unlimited production, biological efficiency could not compete with industrial capacity. May 21, 1943. Captain William Randall stood in the ruins of Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base, watching cleanup crews shovel ash. The smell of burned wood would linger for weeks. The charred hangar would be demolished and rebuilt. The general would requisition a new staff car. The base would continue operations. But the 6 bats that destroyed this base had already delivered their verdict on Project X-ray. They had proven the weapon worked. They had also proven it was uncontrollable. 15 months later, on August 6, 1945, Colonel Paul Tibbets piloted the B-29 Superfortress Enola Gay over Hiroshima, Japan. At 8:15 a.m. local time, Bombardier Thomas Farabee released a single atomic bomb. 43 seconds later, the bomb detonated at 1,900 feet altitude. The resulting fireball incinerated 4 square miles of the city instantly. The death toll eventually reached approximately 140,000. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, Major Charles Sweeney piloted another B-29, Boxcar, over Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m. local time, a second atomic bomb detonated. The death toll, approximately 70,000. 6 days after that, Japan surrendered. Project X-ray, had it been deployed, might have started 100,000 fires across Osaka Bay using 10 aircraft. The fires might have burned for days. The death toll might have reached tens of thousands. Or the fires might have been controlled by Japanese civil defense. Or the bats might have flown in unexpected directions. Or breeding season complications might have weakened them. Or weather might have disrupted the mission. Or any of 1,000 biological variables might have prevented the weapon from achieving its objective. The atomic bomb had none of these uncertainties. Dr. Lytle Adams maintained until his death in 1970 that his Bat bomb would have been more effective and more humane than the atomic bomb. He might have been correct about the humanity. 100,000 small fires would likely have killed fewer civilians than nuclear detonation. But he was certainly wrong about effectiveness. Effectiveness in total war meant guarantee, certainty, the absolute assurance that when you committed resources to an attack, the target would be destroyed. The Bat bomb was brilliant. It was innovative. It leveraged biological systems in ways no weapon before or since has matched. The technical reports conclusively demonstrated its capability. The Carlsbad fire proved its devastating potential, but brilliance could not compete with certainty. Innovation could not compete with overwhelming force. Biological efficiency could not compete with atomic annihilation. The examination of the Carlsbad Army airfield ruins on May 21, 1943, provided all the evidence anyone needed. Project X-ray worked exactly as designed. 6 bats armed with less than 4 ounces of napalm destroyed a military base. The program was not canceled because it failed. It was canceled because something simpler, more reliable, and incomparably more destructive was ready first. And in that single fact lies the entire story of how total war transforms brilliant ideas into historical footnotes. The bat bomb was not poor engineering. It was engineering brilliantly designed to achieve specific goals using specific resources in a specific strategic context. When that context changed, when the Manhattan Project proved atomic weapons were possible, the bat bomb became irrelevant. Not because 1 million armed bats could not burn down Japanese cities, they almost certainly could have, but because one bomb could do the same thing faster, with less uncertainty, and without requiring control over millions of unpredictable biological organisms. The ruins at Carlsbad told the story. The weapon worked, but working was not enough. In total war, the line between genius and obsolescence is measured not in quality, but in power. And when atomic weapons arrived, every other incendiary concept, no matter how ingenious, simply became a fascinating footnote in the history of warfare's most desperate and innovative era.